Daytona Beach, Florida, July 10th, 1949. The tide is out, and the Atlantic has loaned Florida 2 miles of hard, wet sand. No grandstand, just a rope and 5,000 people standing behind it in the sun with their shoes off. The man in front flew as a flight engineer on B-24s. On his 58th mission, Flak tore his left leg apart. Red Byron cannot work a clutch pedal, so his mechanic built a steel stirrup onto it and bolts Byron's boot in before the start. That is how he races, bolted in. Byron takes the flag at just under 81 miles an hour. Now look at what crosses the line behind him. Second, third, fourth. Same make, same model, same brand new engine. Hoods ticking as they cool on the sand. All four were sold as mid-priced family sedans, and the engine underneath them had been designed for a different car entirely, a bigger one, a more expensive one. Somebody inside Oldsmobile went outside the plan. This is the story of the 1949 Oldsmobile 88, the car almost nobody talks about, and the one every muscle car in America is descended from. It is a story about a single sentence. Take the biggest engine your company owns and bolt it into the cheapest, lightest body your company sells. Oldsmobile wrote that sentence first, and it wrote it by breaking a rule General Motors treated as close to sacred. To understand why that was a rebellion, you have to understand the latter. General Motors under Alfred Sloan sold cars in rungs. Chevrolet at the bottom for the working man, then Pontiac, then Oldsmobile, then Buick, then Cadillac at the top for the man who had arrived. New technology entered at the top and trickled down over years, because that was the entire point. That was how you sold a man 5 cars over a lifetime instead of 1. Oldsmobile sat in the polite middle. The oldest surviving car brand in America, founded by Ransom Olds in 1897, and it wore that fact like a cardigan. Its customers were people who had stopped needing to prove anything. The engines matched. A flathead 6 and a flathead straight 8, making 110 horsepower. Smooth, reliable. A museum piece with a fan belt. Tom McCahill, who tested cars for Mechanics Illustrated and wrote The Way a Longshoreman Talks, drove the 1948 Oldsmobile and told millions of readers that accelerating in it felt like stepping on a wet sponge. In Lansing, they read that too. The problem was physics. A flathead puts its valves down in the block beside the cylinder, which caps how much compression you can run, and compression is where power lives. Everybody knew the fix. Move the valves up into the cylinder head and work them with push rods. Overhead valves. Buick had been doing it since before the First World War. What held the industry back was gasoline. Premium at an American filling station ran around 80 octane, and the finest high-compression engine in the world would tear itself apart on that. So General Motors, pushed by its research chief Charles Kettering, leaned on the oil companies to raise octane and told its divisions to design for the fuel that was coming. Which brings us to a strike and drawings nobody asked for. In November of 1945, the United Auto Workers walked out on General Motors and stayed out until March. Plants went quiet. At Oldsmobile, an engineer named Gilbert Burrell used the dead time to sketch an overhead valve V8 of his own. No program number and no budget line. Nobody had told him to. Everything else in this story follows from that. 6 weeks in, Burrell showed the drawings to Chief Engineer Jack Wolfram and General Manager Sherrod Skinner. Neither sent him back to his desk. Wolfram built a group around it, and by November of 1946, the Doodle was a running prototype. Then Cadillac found out. Cadillac had an overhead valve V8 of its own in development, and Cadillac sat at the top of the ladder. The advanced engine belonged to Cadillac. A middle-rung division fielding it in the same year undercut the logic of the ladder and the logic of Cadillac. At the end of 1946, Cadillac won. Corporate management refused to fund the engine. Skinner and Wolfram refused to accept it. In March of 1947, they went over the heads of the men who said no to General Motors President Charles Wilson. He approved the engine for production. Remember that Cadillac lost this round, because Cadillac was coming back, and the second attempt would have erased everything you are about to hear. Hold on to the name for one more reason. The engineer who eventually proved Oldsmobile right worked for Cadillac. Before we get to either of them, take a second and subscribe. We put out stories like this every week about the cars your father argued about, and the engineers Detroit never made famous. The production engine came out at 303.7 cubic inches. Compression was deliberately conservative because the good gasoline had not arrived yet, and the block was drawn with enormous room to grow. It made 135 horsepower and 283 pound-feet of torque against the straight eights 110 and 213. Those are gross ratings, the way Detroit measured until 1972. Policy forbade naming it after Kettering, so it went out under a word that in 1948 meant speed, altitude, and the future arriving whether you were ready. They called it the Rocket. The Rocket went into the Oldsmobile 98, exactly where the ladder said it belonged. The flagship, the costliest car the division built. It sold in record numbers, and it was a waste because the Rocket's defining quality was never horsepower. It was torque, a shove rather than a scream, and bolting a shove to 2 tons of sedan gets you a dignified car that reaches 60 in about 13.5 seconds. Respectable. Nobody ever wrote a song about respectable. Oldsmobile had another body in the same factories, the 76. The entry-level car, 11 inches shorter and around 250 pounds lighter, carrying the old flathead 6 because that is what the ladder said the cheap Oldsmobile deserved. By the best documented account, the man who said the obvious thing out loud was Harold Metzel, Oldsmobile's chief transmission engineer, not a marketing man. The transmission guy who spent his days thinking about how torque reaches a pair of rear wheels. Metzel proposed putting the Rocket V8 into the small 76 body. On paper, that is a part swap. In corporate terms, it was heresy. A customer who could not afford a 98 would get the same engine in a lighter car for less money and beat the man who paid more. That is an attack on the pricing structure of an entire corporation. Cadillac objected again, of course. This time, the brass did not say no and did not say yes. They equivocated. They sat on it. Then they let it through. On February 6, 1949, 7 weeks after the 98, the Series 88 went on sale. The paperwork never called it the Rocket 88. The public did, and the advertising caught up with a line that ran for years. Make a date with a Rocket 88, 0 to 60 in a little over 12 seconds. 97 miles an hour flat out. Your grandmother's crossover would eat it alive. But beside everything else on an American street in 1949, it was a howling animal. Ford was selling flatheads, Chevrolet and Plymouth 6s, all of the measured acceleration with a calendar. There was exactly one place to settle that in public. Bill France had just founded the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing, and his best idea sounds like his dullest. He built a division for cars that were, in the rulebook's words, strictly stock. No cut fenders, no hopped-up engines, no bootlegger tricks. What ran on Sunday sat in the showroom on Monday. That rule turned Oldsmobile's rebellion into a public execution. 8 races ran that first season. Oldsmobile won 5. Lincoln took 2 and Plymouth 1, which means the car from Lansing beat every other manufacturer in America put together. A word about that number because you will see a different one in careful places. Several respected accounts say Oldsmobile won 6 of 9 races in 1949. The season had 8 races, not 9, and the opener at Charlotte went to a Lincoln. 5 of 8 is what the race-by-race results support. The smaller number is the honest one, and it is still domination. Red Byron took the championship. The man with the ruined leg bolted to a clutch pedal became the first champion in NASCAR history, in a mid-priced Oldsmobile that existed because a transmission engineer asked an impertinent question. The showrooms noticed. Oldsmobile sold 100,273 copies of the Series 88 that year, and division-wide it finished up 64%. In an industry where a good year means a couple of points of share, that is not growth. It is a stampede. A 1950 Deluxe 88 Club sedan listed at $1,982. Turn signals were extra, a heater was extra. This was a car a foreman bought on a payment book, carrying the quickest engine near its price in America. The 6-cylinder 76, the shell that had made it possible, was gone after 1950, killed by its own offspring. On the track, it got worse. 19 races in 1950, Oldsmobile 110. Mexico came next, a road race down the entire length of the country to celebrate the new Pan-American Highway. 6 days, more than 2,000 miles of open public road against European teams and professional road racing drivers. A 22-year-old from Oregon named Herschel McGriff bought an Oldsmobile 88 for about $1,900, drove it down and won. Then came 41 races in 1951, the biggest season NASCAR had ever run, and Oldsmobile won 20. 3 seasons straight, the winningest make in American stock car racing was a middle-rung family car carrying an engine meant for wealthy customers. And no other car in America had a hit record named after it. The song was called Rocket 88. It went to number 1 on the Rhythm and Blues chart in 1951. And people have argued for 75 years that it is the first rock and roll record ever made. Now, here is where the men who tried to stop it get their answer. Cadillac's whole objection was that a junior division must not leapfrog the ladder. What actually happened is that the junior division set the agenda for the entire American automobile industry. And every company in Detroit, including Cadillac's own corporate siblings, spent the 1950s chasing a car that cost about $2,000. Count them off. Chrysler and Studebaker brought out overhead valve V8s in 1951, Lincoln in 1952, Buick and Dodge in 1953. Ford and Mercury, whose flathead V8 had defined American performance for 2 decades, did not have one until 1954. Chevrolet, Pontiac, Plymouth, and Packard all arrived in 1955. American Motors in 1956. Stop on the Buick entry for a moment. Buick had valves in the cylinder head decades before the Rocket, sat a full rung above Oldsmobile, and still turned up 4 years late to an idea it practically owned. Chevrolet, the largest automobile manufacturer on the planet, was 6 years late. And here is the man I asked you to hold on to. The engineer who finally brought Chevrolet to the party was Ed Cole, and Ed Cole had co-led the Cadillac 5.8. The very engine built to keep Oldsmobile in its place. Cole moved to Chevrolet as chief engineer in 1952, and in 1955 his team put the small block V8 into production, from drawings to assembly line, in 15 weeks. 265 cubic inches, 162 horsepower with the 2-barrel carburetor, and 180 with the 4-barrel. They dropped it into a Chevrolet, the cheapest full-size car General Motors sold. Cole came from the division that fought hardest to stop Oldsmobile. He watched the trick work, then ran it 1 full rung further down the ladder in the highest volume car in America. Cadillac did not merely lose the argument. Cadillac's own engineer settled it against them. Nothing holds, though. Hudson, a small independent, sat its passengers down inside the frame rails instead of on top of them, and nothing in America cornered like it. Hudson dropped a 308 cubic inch flathead 6 into that chassis, called it the Hornet, and in 1952 won 27 of the 34 races on the schedule. Oldsmobile won 3. Lansing answered the way Detroit answered every problem for the next 20 years: more displacement. The Rocket got bigger, then bigger again, and so did weight, price, and the body wrapped around it, until the thing that made the 88 special quietly stopped being true. Chrysler then ran the formula with real money behind it. For 1955, it built the C300, a hardtop with a Hemi, 2 4-barrel carburetors, and a rating of exactly 300 horsepower. It cost around $4,100, which was Cadillac money, and Chrysler built 1,725 of them. There is a serious argument that the C300, not the Rocket 88, is the first true muscle car. It was engineered as a performance car from the ground up, and it beat the Oldsmobile in stock car racing outright. Others say nothing counts before the 1964 Pontiac GTO because a muscle car needs an intermediate body, a young buyer, and a payment plan. Here is the honest version. The Chrysler was expensive, a rich man's weapon built in tiny numbers, and the whole point of a muscle car is that a man on a normal wage can drive one home. John DeLorean's engineers were doing in 1963 exactly what Harold Metzel proposed 15 years earlier. The 88 was cheap and plain. It sold in six figures to ordinary people, and it went faster than cars costing twice as much. Oldsmobile lasted another 4 decades. The last one, an Alero signed by every worker on the line, was built in Lansing in April of 2004. 107 years. The oldest car company in America, shut down by the corporation that spent 1947 telling it to stay in its lane. Go stand next to a 1949 88 sometime. It does not look like anything. Slab-sided, upright, a little dumpy. Then open the hood. 2 rocker covers, push rods, a big overhead valve V8 in a body built for a 6. Take the biggest engine you have, put it in the cheapest body you sell. Charge less for it than the man upstairs thinks you should. Everything after that was a variation. So settle it in the comments, because this one is genuinely unsettled. Was the first muscle car the 1949 Rocket 88, the 1955 Chrysler 300, or does nothing count until the GTO? And if your father ever brought home an Oldsmobile, tell us which one and what it sounded like on a cold morning.